The sun was just beginning to sink behind the dusty horizon when the rumble of motorcycles echoed through the small town of Ridgewater. The locals had learned that whenever the steel thunder rolled down the street, people stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The Iron Hearts weren't a gang, they were brothers. Tough men with rough hands and louder engines, but hearts that had seen both war and loss. That evening, they stopped outside an old diner, the kind with flickering neon lights and coffee that tasted like burnt dreams. Inside, laughter floated between clinks of coffee mugs and the low hum of classic rock playing from a worn-out jukebox. That was when the door opened, its rusty bell giving a weak ring, and a little boy walked in. His clothes were dusty, his eyes swollen from crying. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The waitress turned first, offering him a smile, but her expression changed when she saw the boy's trembling hands. He stood in silence for a moment, frozen. Then he whispered, his voice cracking like glass, "They took my sister." The whole diner fell silent. The music died. Even the ceiling fan seemed to stop spinning. One of the bikers, Mac, a man built like a bear with tattoos creeping up his neck, set his mug down. The others exchanged glances. The boy looked around, as if trying to find someone to believe him. "Please," he said again, his voice fading, "they took her. 2 men. They put her in a van. I tried to follow but," his words dissolved into tears. Mac knelt beside him. "Hey, kid," he said softly, his gravelly voice suddenly gentle. "What's your name?" "Eli." The boy sniffled. "Eli," Mac repeated, "where did this happen?" The boy pointed toward the road beyond the diner, the one that cut through the woods. "Down by Miller's Field," he said. "They said they'd hurt her if I told anyone." There wasn't a second of hesitation. Chairs scraped. Boots hit the floor. Without a word, the bikers rose to their feet. Mac turned to the others, Ryder, Tex, Goose, and Hawk, and just nodded once. That was all it took. They moved as one, coffee still steaming on the table, half-eaten pie forgotten. The engines roared to life outside, shaking the windows as the sun disappeared completely. The boy stood in the doorway, his small figure framed by the neon light. He watched as they rode off into the dark, the roar of their bikes echoing through the empty streets like a promise. The wind was cold against their faces, but the fire in their chests burned hotter. Mac led the pack, his eyes locked on the thin trail of tire marks leading toward Miller's Field. The moon hung low, bathing the world in a ghostly silver. Somewhere out there, a scared little girl was waiting. And for men who had seen too much of the world's cruelty, that was all the reason they needed. They found the van an hour later, parked near an abandoned barn. Its headlights were off, but smoke from a cigarette glowed faintly inside. Mac signaled for the others to cut their engines. Silence fell. Only the crickets dared to speak. They crept closer, boots sinking into the soft earth. Inside the barn, voices could be heard, low, mocking laughter, and the sound of someone crying. A child's voice. Mac's jaw clenched. He motioned for Goose to circle left, Tex to take the back, Ryder and Hawk to cover him. They had done this before, in different wars, different deserts. But this time, it wasn't duty. It was personal. The door creaked as Mac pushed it open. The laughter stopped. 2 men turned sharply, one with a gun, one holding a rope. In that heartbeat of silence, everything slowed. The child's sob echoed through the rafters. Then chaos erupted. The bikers moved like lightning. Tex tackled the man with the rope to the ground, the two crashing into the dirt in a violent blur. Mac charged the other, disarming him with a punch that could have broken stone. The gun fired once, the bullet splintering wood, missing by inches. Hawk grabbed the weapon and tossed it aside, while Ryder rushed to the girl, who was tied to a post, her eyes wide with terror. "It's okay, sweetheart," Ryder whispered, cutting the rope with his knife. "Your brother sent us." She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his vest. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Mac looked down at the 2 men, groaning on the ground, then at his brothers. "Let's get the kids out," he said simply. They didn't wait for the police. By the time the sheriff arrived, all he found were 2 battered criminals tied up with their own rope and a small piece of leather left on the ground, a biker's patch with the emblem of a heart made of iron. Back at the diner, Eli sat by the window, watching the empty road. The waitress tried to comfort him with a warm cup of cocoa, but he just stared at the darkness. "They'll find her," she said softly. "Those men, they look like they can move mountains." He didn't respond. Then, just when the night began to stretch too long, he heard it, the distant growl of engines returning. He ran to the door. The first bike came into view, headlights slicing through the fog. Mac pulled up, dust swirling around his boots as he stopped. Behind him, Ryder stepped off his bike, holding the little girl wrapped in his leather jacket. "Eli," she cried. The boy ran forward, tears spilling freely as he crashed into her arms. They hugged tightly, trembling and laughing all at once. The whole diner clapped, some crying openly. Mac stood to the side, his face unreadable under the brim of his cap. Then he looked up at the waitress and said quietly, "Make the kid another cocoa. This time, on us." The night could have ended there. It could have been just another story about rough men doing the right thing. But something in that moment changed them all. Eli didn't have parents. The sheriff found out later they had died in a car accident 2 years before. He and his sister, Lily, had been living with a distant uncle who vanished after the kidnapping. The bikers didn't just rescue a girl that night. They found 2 souls who needed a family. Over the next few weeks, Mac and his crew made sure the kids had food, clothes, and safety. They showed up at their foster home with groceries and books. Lily, once too afraid to speak, began to smile again. Eli started sitting on Mac's bike, pretending to ride it, his laughter echoing across the lot. The Iron Hearts became their guardians in every way but name. But trouble wasn't done testing them. One evening, as the sun dipped low again, Mac received a call from the sheriff. "The men you caught, there's more of them." "A trafficking ring," he said grimly. "We're raiding their base tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know." Mac hung up, staring at the photo of Eli and Lily pinned to the corkboard in their garage. His hands tightened around the phone. "Brothers," he said finally, turning to his crew. "Tomorrow, we ride again." The next morning, the Iron Hearts joined the police on the outskirts of a forgotten warehouse by the river. They weren't there for glory, they were there for justice. As the sun broke through the fog, the roar of their bikes filled the air again, a sound that had once frightened people but now brought hope. The raid was swift and fierce. Men who preyed on the innocent were dragged out into the daylight, blinking like rats exposed to truth. When it was over, the sheriff turned to Mac. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said. Mac just nodded. "You could have," he replied. "But I couldn't have slept if I didn't show up." News spread through Ridgewater faster than wildfire. The bikers were no longer seen as outlaws but as heroes. The diner hung their patch on the wall, framed in glass. People who once crossed the street when they rode by now waved and smiled. And as for Eli and Lily, they never spent another Christmas alone. They had family now. Loud, scruffy, leather-wearing family who rode in on engines that sang like thunder and hearts that beat for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Years passed. Eli grew up, tall and strong like the men who saved him. He learned to fix engines, to ride, and to carry the same quiet strength that Mac once had. On his 16th birthday, the club gave him his own jacket, black leather with a small patch on the back, a heart made of iron, wrapped in angel wings. Beneath it, stitched in silver, were 3 words, "Ride for others." That night, Eli stood in front of the diner, the same place it all began, and whispered to himself, "They took my sister once, but they'll never take anyone again." The engines roared behind him, and he smiled, knowing he was exactly where he belonged. Dash dash dash. But the story doesn't just end with engines and dust. It ends in the hearts of everyone who hears it. Because courage isn't always clean or beautiful. Sometimes it wears oil-stained gloves and rides under the moon. Sometimes it's found in men who've made mistakes but still know right from wrong when they see it. And sometimes, it's in the whisper of a terrified little boy who found the courage to ask for help, and in the hearts of those who didn't wait a second to give it. And as the Iron Hearts ride through the night, their headlights cutting through the dark, people still turn to look, not out of fear but with a kind of reverence. Because somewhere out there, a child is safe because they didn't hesitate. Somewhere out there, justice wears leather and steel.